Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I commence my submissions to this debate on the 2023 budget, I would like to ask for us, sir, to, as is the custom of the House, stand and observe one moment's silence on the passing of our colleague, Ms. Rajkumari Bancroft. I know that that is a long-standing custom of the House, but it appears as though we missed it this morning.
Honorable Member, I have no problem with observing moments of silence in recognition of the late Honorable Member, but I want to differ a bit with you in long-standing custom in the House. We do have a long-standing custom which relates to the House paying tribute to fallen members. But we will observe some moments of silence.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Speaker.
I will say when it begins.
Thank you, sir.
Starting now. Thank you. Honorable Member, I'll start your time running at 1:17 and
You're most kind, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise, as I said, to make my contribution to the 2023 budget debates. I have to, however, as a matter of record, Mr. Speaker, address some of the utterances of my colleague on the other side who went before me. Mr. Speaker, I sat and listened, in amazement, because it continues to, I shouldn't be surprised, but somehow they managed to keep surprising me with the ease with which they engage in misleading the House and misleading the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, first of all, we heard...
Honorable Member, that's imputing, and how you're saying it is with confidence that you know it's a fact. I want to believe that you could do better. So let's observe the standing orders.
Mr. Speaker, I want to attempt to correct then, if I may put it that way, several misconceptions that might have been conveyed to the people of Guyana by my colleague on the other side. The first one being that it was the AP and UAFC government that scuttled the Amila Falls project. Mr. Speaker, we all know that the IDB, Mr. Speaker, adjudged this project as being environmentally not feasible. That is a matter of public record. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to us, sir, I want to say to us as well that I sat here, Mr. Speaker, and I heard, sir, I heard the honorable member speaking about us having all the money. Mr. Speaker, every Guyanese who is paying attention knows exactly when the oil money became available to the Republic of Guyana, Mr. Speaker. And so for the honorable member to stand there and to say we did nothing with all of the money is misleading the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we have to set these things straight, sir. Mr. Speaker, the ease with which we say these things to the House. I heard the honorable member, Mr. Ashni Singh, stand in this House and tell us that they have completed synthetic tracks in Region 6 and Region 10. Well, as a Lindoner, I had to go and check for myself, Mr. Speaker. The tracks are incomplete. And for misleading this House, Mr. Speaker, he ought to be Mr. Speaker, he ought to be brought before the Privileges Committee, or better yet, he ought to be made to don his tracksuit with DPI in tow and made to run those tracks that he says have been completed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look, we owe a duty to the people of Guyana to be honest with them. And when you stand and you hear the colleagues on the other side of the House, just say these things with ease. Just say they say it with ease, Mr. Speaker. It really boggles the mind. And so I wanted to clear up very early those misconceptions. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that I have, and that I believe is cause for alarm, is the minister's utterances that they will be going after co-op lands. Mr. Speaker, he said in his address that they will be going after those co-ops with lands that are idle. Mr. Speaker, I believe, sir, that that is an indication that this government intends to dispossess Guyanese of cooperative lands, Mr. Speaker, lands which by law they have a vested proprietary interest. But Mr. Speaker, if we were to look at this government's track record, we will see that they simply do not care. They bulldoze the residents at Mocha, Mr. Speaker, displaced them, destroyed their belongings, killed their animals, and now they're going after the co-ops. And Mr. Speaker, I will say that it is not passing strange that a pattern is developing of dispossessing people, Mr. Speaker, of a certain ethnicity who have land, Mr. Speaker. It is known all throughout Guyana that Afro-Guyanese, Mr. Speaker, are heavily involved in cooperatives and in cooperative lands. And so, Mr. Speaker, you know, I know that the chief apologist for the other side was on his usual soapbox, saying that Amanza will speak to racism, as if his reverse psychology could prevent me, sir, from pointing out that the PPPC administration is a clear and present danger to the constitutional rights and freedoms of Guyanese. They're coming after our property. They're coming after our freedom of speech. They are coming, sir, after our way of life, Mr. Speaker. They are a clear and present danger. And so let the Vice President know that his reverse psychology will not work with me. It is amazing to me that a government that has all of this oil money invests so much time in minding this opposition's business. They have everything to say. They're up in our business. They talk about, oh, they're ineffective, they're inefficient. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, the General Secretary, their PR machinery has already said she has resigned. I have never seen a government so invested in what they have deemed a weak and effective opposition. The honorable member before me took 15 minutes out of his speech to go member by member to belittle and to malign the character of the gentleman on the honorable side. Mr. Speaker, it is amazing that with all of this oil money, the government is spending more time about what's happening in the PNC and who in resign and who in do what, than in adumbrating a clear developmental path and a clear vision for this country. Mr. Speaker, we on the other side, we good here. You all need to run the country and do it in an inclusive and an equitable manner. Mr. Speaker, I just thought I had to set the record straight on those matters. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I was preparing my presentation for this budget, I had a Yogi Berra moment. It felt like it was deja vu all over again. Mr. Speaker, I realized that I could take my last year presentation and word for word regurgitate it here, and it would be just as apt and just as appropriate. Mr. Speaker, last year, I stood here and I said to the people of Guyana, let us see where this government spends their money. And we will tell you, that will tell you what they value and what their values are. And Mr. Speaker, we saw it last year. We saw it in 2022. We saw how much they value the hardworking public servants of this country, Mr. Speaker, who turn up every day, rain or shine, to keep the wheels of this country turning. And you know what they rewarded them with? A measly taxable 8% increase, Mr. Speaker. That is how much they value the public servants. Mr. Speaker, we saw how much they valued Guy Suko. We saw how much they valued Guy Suko, Mr. Speaker. $13 billion poured into an industry, Mr. Speaker, that they themselves have said is dying. The Vice President is on record as telling sugarcane workers, you all have to find jobs in other sectors. But here they are, pouring $13 billion. And they have the audacity, Mr. Speaker, to say to the people of Guyana that it was the AP and UAFC that killed the sugar industry, when the truth is that it was under their government that most of the sugarcane factories were closed, Mr. Speaker. Those are the facts. But they have this penchant of lying sorry, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw. Mr. Speaker, they lack fidelity to the truth. They lack fidelity to the truth. And so we have to continue to set the record straight. Now, Mr. Speaker, they have allocated $4 billion to Guy Suko already for this year. And I think, they're going to come for more. This is just the first. We got at least 3 more supplementals, I am sure, for Guy Suko. Mr. Speaker, under the coalition, we continued to adumbrate right-sizing this industry, Mr. Speaker. Right-sizing the industry. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the way in which this budget is couched, I want to show you how this government values, how they value the people. Mr. Speaker, we know where sugar is going. They have admitted it. It is gone with the wind. They have said it. Mr. Speaker, but yet, and I want to quote the Honorable Member Ashley Singh, he says, government is resolutely committed to invest heavily to mold better, sharper, and more creative young minds. He said this when he was talking about youth development. And guess what? He allocated a whopping $960 million, Mr. Speaker, to youth development. $960 million. Not even $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, when you look at it, Mr. Speaker, it means that the government of Guyana has allocated $35 for every youth for their youth development. But they want to talk about robust investment. Mr. Speaker, let me say this. This issue about free education at university continues to be a fleeting illusion. And then I heard their chief apologist saying to us that, oh, we didn't say in the first year, we got 5 years, so we could still do it, insulting the intelligence of the Guyanese people. But Mr. Speaker, I suspect, Chris, that they want to use it as an elections gimmick. And so closer to elections, they're going to come and announce, oh, free university education, as if they're the champions of free university education, when the truth is that from 1976 to 1994, Guyanese enjoyed free education from nursery to university as enshrined in our Constitution. So when they come and beg this big announcement, we will simply remind them, you're not doing us a favor. You are simply righting a historical wrong that you committed against us, the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, and that is the thread, sir, that is common throughout this entire budget. The ability of this government to do more for the people of Guyana is present, but their willingness, sir, is absent, is woefully absent. And you see it through the way they apportion and what they allocate to. Mr. Speaker, as a result of this, in the midst of plenty, there is poverty. 48% of Guyanese are living below the poverty line. And this is not the AP and UAFC coalition stats. These are the stats by the reputable organizations from which we get the statistics. 48%, Mr. Speaker, according to the World Bank. According to the World Bank, just in case I'm not clear, they said, sir, that 43% of the Guyanese are living under the poverty line. Mr. Speaker, they have said, Mr. Speaker, The FAO in 2023 said that 43% of Guyanese cannot afford a healthy diet and that 5% of Guyanese are malnourished. That is what the FAO report says, Mr. Speaker. So they can heckle all they want. They like to say the numbers do not lie. Well, the numbers are not lying now, Mr. Speaker. The numbers are not lying now. Mr. Speaker, I will quote from the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report. You all need to go pull it down and read it. The World Economic Forum report says, Mr. Speaker, that the cost of living crisis is the #1 risk the world will face in the short term over the next 2 years and in the long term for the next 10 years. That is what the World Economic Forum report says, Mr. Speaker. And yet, sir, with all of this empirical data that is showing that we are suffering, Mr. Speaker, this government, sir, allocated a measly 0.5% of this budget to address cost of living and the cost of living crisis, Mr. Speaker. 0.5%, not 1, 0.5, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and we have a head of this government that has the gall to say, oh, the people of Guyana are my friends and my family. Mr. Speaker, with friends and family like these, may God protect us from our enemies, Mr. Speaker. May God protect us from our enemies. Mr. Speaker, this is serious. Mr. Speaker, more can be done for the people of Guyana who are suffering. Mr. Speaker, that sweeper cleaner who earns $85,000 a month, Mr. Speaker, $50,000 on rent, another $15,000 on transport. She has to spend $10,000 a week to feed herself and her 2 children, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is the end of her salary. She still has not paid GWI. She still has not paid GPL. And the head of this state, Mr. Speaker, the head of state and his government have the temerity to put in the budget that they are studying cost of living measures. For the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker, they have been studying and consulting, and the people of Guyana are starving. And whilst the Rome is burning, Nero is fiddling his thumbs. Mr. Speaker, we will say, sir, that we are happy. We are happy that this grant, the Because We Care grant, sir, has been increased. That is a good thing. And we commend the government for that, Mr. Speaker. And we commend them also for continuing the feeding program that the coalition government started, because we appreciate, sir, the connection between nutrition and cognition, Mr. Speaker, and learning. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is good, but Mr. Speaker, more is possible. More is possible because we have more at our disposal, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for example, why can we not work together to devise a scheme to subsidize transportation for school children? Mr. Speaker, they've allowed the buses to rot. Mr. Speaker, why can we not? We have the funds, sir, and with 0.5% of this budget allocated, it will mean that parents will no longer have to carry the burden of paying for transportation, Mr. Speaker, freeing up money in their pockets and allowing them to have more disposable income. Mr. Speaker, my colleague, Ms. Flubes, earlier gave us the price of commodities, of basic food items in the shop. Mr. Speaker, why can we not, as this government that so cares about people, Mr. Speaker, why can we not have a program to subsidize the basic food items, Mr. Speaker? Egg, rice, sugar, milk, potatoes, Mr. Speaker, so that single parents, the most vulnerable amongst us, sir, can go to the store and be able to have, sir, these items that they depend upon for their survival. Mr. Speaker, it is possible for us to do with a mere 1.5% allocation from this budget, Mr. Speaker. The ability, sir, is present. The willingness, sir, is absent. And that is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look, we want to say that we are happy that programs such as WIN, Mr. Speaker, are continuing. We are happy about that, sir. Mr. Speaker, we agree that it is important for women to be able to participate meaningfully in our economy. Mr. Speaker, the most recently published labor force survey shows that the labor participation rate of women is 40% less than that of men, despite less women participating in the market, Mr. Speaker. Yes, sir.
With us, right?
I'll be happy to do that, sir. Mr. Speaker, the labor force survey, our last labor force survey, Mr. Speaker, shows that despite less women participating in the labor market, the unemployment rate of women is 50% higher. Mr. Speaker, we cannot have inclusive growth if our women are not gainfully employed or able to meaningfully participate in this oil and gas economy. And Mr. Speaker, while we commend the WIN program, the statistics that I just cited suggest to us, Mr. Speaker, that these interventions are not enough. And so to this end, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the government that empowering women economically is not just a moral imperative, but it is an economic strategy. It is smart. It is smart. It is the smart thing to do. Mr. Speaker, when our women thrive, so does the economy. And so I want to urge us, Mr. Speaker, to invest more in partnering with private sector women's organizations. There's the Women in Oil and Gas. There is the Women's Chamber of Commerce. There's the We Lead organizations. Those organizations, sir, that will be able to establish training programs and to train and mentor women in business and to set up business incubators for women. Mr. Speaker, the initiatives are present, but my point is, sir, that we need to do more because more is possible. Because for the first time in our post-colonial history, in our post-independence history, Mr. Speaker, we have the resources to do all of these things, sir. And we can do it today. Mr. Speaker, the time is now, sir, for bold and visionary investments in our human capital. Mr. Speaker, we must understand and we must know that our human capital is by far our most important asset, Mr. Speaker. It is the most important for our long-term economic development. Sir, look, let's look at the investment as it relates to capital projects. Mr. Speaker, since assuming office, this government has increased spending on roads and bridges and buildings by 600%. 600%. Mr. Speaker, and CapEx outstripped employment spending by 5%. Mr. Speaker, despite receiving about $335 billion from the Natural Resources Fund within the last 2 years, this government's been spending has produced a deficit of 12%. Mr. Speaker, this is alarming. Mr. Speaker, you know, we euphorically boast about being the fastest growing economy in this part or in the world, period. But Mr. Speaker, I will say to us that the cautionary tale of Ghana is there to tell us that unless we are prudent, sir, unless we are prudent, we could end up there, Mr. Speaker. As you know, Ghana was declared as having the fastest growing economy in the world in 2019. And today, sir, they're facing their worst debt crisis, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, the time is now more than ever for sober and temperate, sir, spending. Mr. Speaker, and let me make this clear, because the chief apologists on the other side like to say that we don't understand big picture and we don't support infrastructure. We're not against infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to make that very, very clear. I wish to disabuse the minds of my colleagues on the other side that we are against infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we understand on this side of the House that infrastructure is one of the subsets of the components that will drive our long-term economic growth, Mr. Speaker. But what we are against, Mr. Speaker, is the reckless spending. That is what we are against. What we are against, Mr. Speaker, is the recklessness with which this government is spending the people of Guyana's money, Mr. Speaker. Last year, this government allocated $218 billion, sir, to capital expenditure progress. We warned then that neither the government nor the private sector could, and even the two entities collectively did not have the capacity, sir, to execute that size of a project. We warned that our efficiency gap was so severe that about 41% of the allocated sum would be wasted, Mr. Speaker. And exactly what we have warned about has happened. You only have to look in the newspapers and on the Facebook to see these roads that they are building, Mr. Speaker, and are cutting ribbons for, Mr. Speaker. Nothing but glorified footpaths, Mr. Speaker. And when they are wider roads, Mr. Speaker, they're already sliding into the canal. Go to Burma, Mr. Speaker, and contractors are receiving, sir, millions, tens of millions to start work. And 6 months later, nothing. Mr. Speaker, this year CapEx stands at $388 billion. Of course, barring the supplementals that they will come for. And Mr. Speaker, you know what is the funny, sir? That's not the part that befuddles me in all of this, you know. What befuddles me is that we are investing hundreds of billions of our money, building all kinds of roads and bridges and all kinds of things, Mr. Speaker. And the most critical piece of infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, we are neglecting. Mr. Speaker, the sea walls, Mr. Speaker, was sea and river defense. It's the most critical infrastructure for a low-lying coastal state like Guyana, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every country in the world is fortifying itself against rising sea levels, Mr. Speaker, against the effects of climate change. And guess what, sir? We're doing the opposite. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we decreased our allocation to sea and river defenses. We allocated $5.5 billion last year, and this year we have allocated $4.9 billion. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the economic dynamism that we're talking about. Mr. Speaker, every country in the world is fortifying itself. Every country with the resources are doing the projects necessary to fortify themselves against climate change and rising sea levels. But we here in Guyana are doing the opposite. Mr. Speaker, the science is clear. Sea levels are rising, sir. And the science is telling us, sir, by 2030, Mr. Speaker, by 2030, it is entirely possible that Georgetown will be underwater. Mr. Speaker, the science is clear. It tells us that we are more prone now to tsunamis and tidal waves than we have ever been. And this government is running around this country, building roads, building bridges, building hotel rooms, building golf courses, building synthetic tracks, and failing to do the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, and that is to protect them from flooding and from the sea coming in on us, Mr. Speaker. It appears as though, sir, that if it is left up to this PVPC government, all of us are going to be washed away. Mr. Speaker, and to hear these good men and women on the other side pontificate, Mr. Speaker, and one piece of critical infrastructure they have neglected. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to foreign affairs. You know, I usually leave my good colleague on the other side for last. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear at the outset, as we have said continuously. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of our territorial integrity and of our sovereignty, Mr. Speaker, we stand resolutely. We stand as resolutely, sir, as the Pacaraimas, and we are saying, sir, that we will support all of the endeavors of this government, Mr. Speaker, that is geared towards preserving, sir, our territorial integrity Mr. Speaker, I want to put on record our gratitude to the bipartisan team who late last year, sir, made some excellent submissions to the ICJ, Mr. Speaker. Their submissions were, in my view, impenetrable. And so we look forward, sir, to a victory, not only for international law, but for the people of Guyana. Having said that, though, Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me, sir. It would be remiss of me, while we stand against those that would want to alter the shape of Guyana, it would be remiss of me, sir, not to draw attention to a matter that threatens not to undermine us from without, but from within, sir. And that is the unchecked migration across our porous borders, particularly, sir, in the Essequibo and the establishment of settlements there. Mr. Speaker, this government appears either unable or unwilling to appreciate that this is an existential threat to us as Guyanese and to our sovereignty, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they have this attitude of burying their heads in the sand. That, Mr. Speaker, and coupled with the politically expedient decision that they took to alter the requirements, to water down the requirements for the obtaining of a Guyanese birth certificate, places us in clear jeopardy, sir, of being undermined from within. And we must demand, sir, that this government pays attention to this matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the time is now for a clear and comprehensive immigration policy. Because, sir, we are not against immigration. We're not against immigration. For decades, Guyanese have migrated in search for a better life for themselves and families, Mr. Speaker. And so we're not against migration, but what we are asking for and what we are demanding is that this government expound, sir, a clear immigration policy so that we understand where we stand and we understand what the future course of actions will look like. This ad hoc transactional approach to our foreign relations has to stop, Mr. Speaker. You can't be going all the way to the Asiatic regions, Mr. Speaker, to talk about labor shortage when you have failed to look right in the Caribbean first, Mr. Speaker, for labor force. There's a level, sir, of inconsistency, sir, in this government's approach. Mr. Speaker, let us say that at the epicenter of our foreign policy lies, at the epicenter of our foreign affairs, rather, lies the issue of our foreign policy. Mr. Speaker, which entails the general objectives, sir, of our state and its interaction with foreign actors. Mr. Speaker, of course, it is formulated on the basis of our domestic policies and other international considerations. And Mr. Speaker, diplomacy is that vehicle through which our foreign policy is carried to its destination.
Honourable Member, and an extension is the vehicle. You need to conclude.
Comrade Speaker, I move that the Honourable Member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chief Whip. Honourable Member, you may continue to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look, for decades, our foreign policy has been informed, sir, by clearly discernible principles. Clearly discernible principles. Friends of all, satellites of none, etc. Mr. Speaker, now we have no clue as to what we're doing. We have embarked upon this path of transactionalism, Mr. Speaker, that will redound to our detriment later on. Mr. Speaker, there is no clearly adumbrated foreign policy. Where's the Todd Doctrine? Where's the Jagdeo Doctrine? Nothing, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing because they have no vision for the foreign affairs sector. Mr. Speaker, we, sir, have been now victim of inconsistencies, a carnival of inconsistencies. One day Taiwan is opening an office, the next day it's closed. Mr. Speaker, what are we doing? Mr. Speaker, we have departed, sir, from long-standing, Mr. Speaker, positions. We have de-recognized the SADR, Mr. Speaker, and it seems as though we are blowing blown with every wind of doctrine. But Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what the trouble is. Mr. Speaker, the trouble is that this government is unable to discern between its private interests and the interests of the state. And so the state's interests are subjected to their private interests and their deals and their kickbacks, Mr. Speaker. That is what the problem is. Mr. Speaker, we are now viewed as day traders, and so nobody takes us seriously anymore. Mr. Speaker, professional diplomats, sir, professional diplomats were the hallmark of our diplomacy. We were able to punch above our weight in the diplomatic arena. Now we are saddled with the likes of Charan Das Prasad. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, the rule is you can't raise someone's name who can't defend themselves in here.
I'm guided, sir. I'm guided, sir. Mr. Speaker, the High Commissioner, the former High Commissioner of Guyana to India, Mr. Speaker, who was seen on videotape, you know, in the vilest manner, abusing, Mr. Speaker, of Indian national, Mr. Speaker. And then you know what, Mr. Speaker? Again, this propensity, sir, to mislead the people of Guyana. We had the head of state on TV saying that Charan Das Prasad will be recalled. That is a matter of public record. Mr. Speaker, I wrote in this house asking the Honorable Minister, when is it that Mr. Charan Das Prasad was recalled as Foreign Affairs Minister? And you know what he told us? November, let me quote him correctly, November 10, 2022, Mr. Speaker, when the head of state appeared on television in this country and said to the people of Guyana in October that Mr. Charan Das Prasad is returning home. Mr. Speaker, that is the difficulty I have, the ease with which this government would mislead the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, look, years on, we are still yet to appoint ambassadors to Venezuela and to Brazil, Mr. Speaker, two of our most consequential interactions. Mr. Speaker, it appears that this government is only able or concerned to put people in positions who they consider as loyalists, Mr. Speaker, and so they would prefer to go for years without appointing an ambassador, Mr. Speaker, rather than give it, sir, to a discerning professional diplomat, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to conclude. Mr. Speaker, and I will conclude by saying there's so much to say, Mr. Speaker, but so little time. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, I want to say to us all that the oil production offers this country a glorious opportunity to boost inclusive growth and to diversify the economy by addressing our human capital and our infrastructure gaps. Mr. Speaker, it is clear to me that the PPPC cannot get out of its own way to govern this country in a fair and equitable and inclusive manner. Mr. Speaker, even the projects that are intended to be transformative are either geographically misplaced or woefully underfunded. The logic, sir, behind putting a tourism and hospitality industry in Port Morant, in the agricultural belt of this country, when the hotels are 90% of them located in the capital city, is beyond me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the failure to put a robust sea defense program, sir, into effect is tantamount to us, sir, abandoning our coast to the sea. Mr. Speaker, this budget is high on dollars, but wanting, seriously wanting in common sense. Big on concrete, but short on care and compassion. Mr. Speaker, once again, we are faced with a budget that does nothing for the poor and working class in comparison to what is being done for big business, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, while I thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of Finance rather, and their hard-working staff for putting together this budget, I am afraid that in its current iteration, I cannot support it. Thank you, sir.